And thank you everyone for joining today. I see some familiar faces and friends in the registration there and in the attendees, and I'm glad that you are here with us. You know, this area of parish mergers, as I travel the country and talk to different parishes and dioceses, it's something that's going on that a lot of you are experiencing and wrestling with and trying to figure out. It can have a lot of negative connotations to it. But I hope today we'll look at some of the positives that can come out of it and how we can achieve those outcomes. But I also want to preface it by saying there are so many different models to this. There's so many different strategies that people are approaching this with. And, you know, there's a saying we have at Parish Catalyst is that no model is perfect, but some are useful and helpful. And there is no perfect model for this. I'm sure a lot of it has to do with communities and cultures and challenges that you're facing. So we're not going to really get into the models a lot today. We're going to talk more about leadership principles and practices that help make mergers successful. So I've got a few guests today. The first is going to be Jim Tomberlin from the Unstuck group. I love that name, the Unstuck group. They help churches get unstuck. Jeff Corrigan, who's a Renew author, but also has his own consultancy, Corrigan and Associates. And then Father Neil Mannernock, who is from Epiphany Parish in Mason City, Iowa, and he's a part of one of our learning communities, but he has pastored through a merger that began about 10 years ago. So kind of in the earlier stages of this. So, but let's go to Jim first. Jim is the multi-site and merger strategist at the Unstuck group, but he's also the co-author of Better Together, along with my friend, Dr. William Bird, in the book, Better Together, Making Church Mergers Work. This, as he'll explain, this was originally written for Protestant churches, but a lot of work went in with Protestant mainline denominations that have very much a similar governmental structure as the Catholic Church. So I think there's a lot of similarities there. But please feel free to type in any questions you have for Jim in the Q&A at the bottom. He's going to be with us at the end of this webinar to answer any questions live. So I hope that you'll take advantage of that. So with that said, let's go to my conversation with Jim Tomberlin. Jim, thanks for joining me today, and it's so good to see you again. Hope things are great out there in Colorado, enjoying the spring. You know, as I was looking at your book, Better Together, that you created along with Dr. Bird, I saw that you talked to a lot of different types of merging parishes and even merging institutions that were implementing this. Tell us a little bit about that.
First of all, John, thanks for the invitation to join you and speaking to the Parish Catalyst Network. It's a great honor and privilege to be with you today. Yes, our book, Better Together, is a compilation of a lot of different mergers across the spectrum, from very congregationally driven churches, non-denominational churches, mainline denominations as well. All have different governance models, but all have experienced mergers and are experiencing mergers, and we're seeing this on the increase. And I believe that what we've learned in studying the Protestant varieties of church mergers can also be useful in the Catholic basis as well.
I think you're right. And I think the principles that you found here that go beyond the models, but the principles of leadership are what will be the most helpful to us. So let's just start with the first question. Why merge? Why would 2 or 3 or more parishes do this? Why would it be helpful?
Well, I think when people hear the word merger, we often have very negative connotations. It has a lot of baggage with the word merger. And often we think about all the things that we are losing or giving up if we merge with another congregation, another parish. But I like to start with, instead of focusing on what you might lose, is to focus, first of all, on how we might actually be better together by merging. And there's several benefits of merging. First of all, our 2 parishes could be better together individually, that is, rather than staying separate. That's one potential benefit. A second benefit is that 2 or more parishes could accomplish more together than separately. We call that synergy, where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. 1 + 1 = 3. Another benefit is that our city, our community, our local town could be better served if we joined together, joining forces for a greater impact locally. And then lastly, really most importantly, the kingdom of God could be further enlarged by joining together. These are the reasons that we to consider merging, and it's why we named our book Better Together.
I like that, and I like the positivity of it, because we really can have a sum that is greater than the parts. I think it's important for us to remember that. I especially like your point on could our city be better served? You know, as we as some ministries actually share resources and share ideas and share relationships and networks, we could be a better church for our city, a better parish for our city. Not just seeking to be the best one in our city, but how could we serve our city more? So when we look at these benefits and we say, well, that sounds good. This might be something helpful to us, but it's not something we want to do with every parish. When is it a good idea? And how do we discover that answer? What are some questions we might want to ask ourselves?
Well, I would say, John, that first of all, every merger is unique. There's every congregational coming together has its own unique church print or congregational print, but all mergers will wrestle with the same three basic questions. The first question, is it possible for us to come together as two parishes, as coming together as one, either in one location or in two locations? I think the Catholic parish is well positioned for the possibility of a merger with its shared heritage, shared beliefs, practices, and a common geography. And so there's a strong possibility for two or more parishes to come together as one. But the question is it really feasible? What we mean by that, it's a nice idea perhaps for us to join together, but is it doable? Is it practical? Are we really compatible, even though we have a shared heritage and language and common geography and all that sort of thing? Is it really are we compatible? And then thirdly, if we decide that we are compatible and it is doable and it's practical, but does it make sense to do it? Is this merger really desirable? Do the benefits of joining together outweigh the cost, the change, the sacrifice of joining together? Do we really want to do this, even though it makes sense and we could be better together? Do we really want to do it? And probably most importantly, do we believe that God wants us to do this? Those are the three questions of which the whole merger conversation revolves around between congregations, between parishes.
Well, it kind of sounds like a marriage, right? I know that's an illustration that you use in your book, that it is like a marriage, and you talk about these stages of a merger that are a lot like the stages of a relationship. Let's look at those now.
Well, I would say how parishes address those three questions, John, is what makes each merger unique. But we have identified 5 distinct stages that every merger conversation goes through, and we use this analogy of a courtship. The first stage, beginning with what we call the exploration stage, or is like dating, where two people or a couple are considering the possibility of marriage. That's the purpose of dating. And so we're defining that relationship. Is this a conversation that could lead to marriage? And so that's exploration stage. And the second stage moves into negotiating, which is more like a courtship, where a couple is seriously considering their compatibility. So when they're asking questions like, how many children do you want to have? How do you manage your finances? When do you open your Christmas gifts, on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day? Some of these are really important. Some of things are trivial, but you're really getting to know each other, and you're really trying to determine, are we compatible enough to consider seriously marriage? And as a couple works through those issues, they're negotiating with themselves in a sense. That's what we call the courtship. And if they can conclude that, we have enough in common, we have enough similarities and likes, and we complement each other in our differences enough that, we would be, let's get married. And that leads us to the third stage, where they declare, the declaration stage, where we announce, or a couple decides to get married and declares it publicly. by announcing a wedding date. We're getting married. That's what we call the engagement or declaration stage. And then we name a date, and the fourth stage is what we call this consolidation stage, which is like a wedding ceremony. It's where a couple inaugurates the new beginning of two becoming one with a wedding event, the wedding celebration. And then that leads us into the fifth stage of integration, where is like a marriage, where the couple learn to live together and begin to produce a family. And so every merger goes through these stages. Some of them don't get all the way to the end and don't come to pass. Others do. And so, but I hope this is helpful.
How important is the communication aspect of communicating it well, casting a vision for it, communicating in a way that does define the relationship for the parishioners?
Well, I would say that it's one of the most important things to do once you have decided to join together, that we communicate to the two congregations, to the parishes, to all the people involved, why are we doing this? What are the benefits of doing this? What will be the outcome if we do? How will it look like on the other side of joining together? It's huge, because where there's a lack of information, people fill in many times, as you know, with the wrong information or misinformation. And so it's a huge piece of success of a good merger outcome is to over communicate.
Our mutual friend, Katie Cole, she's shared with us before about change management. And one thing she always emphasizes is that we don't just talk about what's going to change or what's going to be new, but we also talk about what's not going to change and help people realize, hey, everything's not getting thrown out here. There's some things about us that will not change, that you can hold on to, that are a firm foundation that you can know as an anchor to who we will always be. So I think you're right. That communication piece is key. You talk about defining the relationship.
I would say, John, let me say one thing too. It's so important in a merger process that we talk about addressing the issues. In our book, we actually identify 25 distinct issues that every merger should think through and work through together, the two congregations, and really answer all those questions and issues of what will this look like and be if we do join together. And so to the degree that you flesh that out and work through those issues, and then that's what you communicate to your congregations, is so helpful. And to get that done, not after you get together, so to speak, after you get married, but before. John, I would say that kind of a major premise of this whole book and thinking about mergers, that good merger outcomes are like a dance where one leads and the other follows, or one leads and one congregation leads and the other congregation joins. You can't have two leads in a dance, and you can't have two follows in a dance. One has to lead and one has to follow. Both are equally important and valuable, but they have one leads and the other follows. Those are the mergers that have good outcomes. And all mergers fall into, or all parishes, I should say, fall into one of three categories or health categories. Every congregation, Protestant or Catholic, across the spectrum, is either in one of three categories. They're either struggling, that is, they're in decline, losing membership, losing attendees, losing financially perhaps, or they're stuck. That is, they're not losing people and resources, but they're not gaining either. They're stuck. Or they're strong. That is, that they are growing and their new people are coming into the congregation, and resources are flowing. And so every congregation can ask themselves, where am I? Where am I? And are we struggling? Are we stuck? Are we strong? And when it comes to determining who's the lead parish and who's the joining parish, the lead parish is not determined by its size or by its wealth, but by its health. That's what determines who's a strong church, is the health of a congregation.
And it is leadership, right? Success rises or falls on leadership, no matter what your endeavor. So what are some things that you would recommend for parish leaders as they guide people through a merger? What's important for those leaders?
Well, I would say, first of all, John, that it's very important that great merger leaders are merger friendly. And what I mean by that is that they are humble, they have a kingdom mindset, and they are compassionate. Let me break that down a little bit more. I love one of the favorite passages from the Bible that really speaks to the undergirding of what could be a good, healthy merger outcome is Philippians chapter 2. The Apostle Paul says there in chapter 2, verse 1, to make my joy complete by being like-minded, that's very important in the merger, having the same love, being one in spirit and of one mind, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, but rather in humility, value others above yourselves. Love that. Not looking to your own interests, the apostle writes, but each of you to the interests of the others. That's humility. That's a great attitude to have towards the other parish that you're dealing with. Secondly, when we talk about being kingdom-minded, the Apostle Paul writes in Philippians 2, verse 21, for everyone, he's talking about Timothy, his right hand, who he was sending to the church at Colossae. He says, for everyone looks out for their own interest, but Timothy is concerned for you. Everyone looks out for their own interest, but not those of Jesus Christ. And so when we talk about being kingdom-minded, it's like putting aside my own preferences, my own biases, and say, what does the interest that Jesus has for this parish, for this community? And then lastly, compassionate. Paul writes about Timothy, I have no one else like Timothy who will show genuine concern for your welfare. And so I think those are some of the key characteristics that are keys to success in a merger conversation between leaders. What I mean by compassion in this context is it's very important to understand that there's a grieving process that parishes go through when they join with another, especially those who are giving up more and giving up a lot, or just making changes. And even though when they believe it's the right thing to do, it's still difficult. And compassionate leaders are sensitive to the grieving process that parishioners are going to be going through.
Just this past weekend, I was in LA, and I ran into Dr. Brett Hoover, who wrote the book, The Shared Parish. And he has a quote in this book from Father Stephen Dudek, that the shared parish is a crucible of grief. And that's a strong statement, but a crucible is something where metals are refined and they're melded together and they become one, but there is a lot of heat. And there can be a lot of pain and a lot of suffering and struggle in that process. And I think we need to honor that. And in your book, you have some quotes from people as they identify the different stages of grief. And let's look at those now.
The first stage of grief, as you know, is denial, where people can't believe this is happening to them. And here's a quote that we received. I can't believe this is happening to my parish. I did not know our parish was struggling, in trouble, or concerned about its future. A second stage of grief is bargaining, where can't we fix our parish ourselves? Can we just reorganize, relocate, reduce our budget, change our staff, etc.? So there's that bargaining, resisting the idea of joining together. A third stage of grief is anger. I feel kicked in the gut. I'm devastated and feel betrayed. I like my parish the way it is. I gave a lot of my time and money to this parish, and now I feel like it's being taken away from me.
And as you mentioned earlier, the state of the parish or the unhealth of the parish might have in some ways been hidden from people or withheld from them, or maybe they're just not aware because they're not thinking that way, but their anger is real because they're surprised by it often, right?
Sometimes parish leaders, congregational leaders, or those above don't want to, if we say it's as bad as it really is, it may make it worse. And so we want to give the appearance, not trying to be deceptive, but we're trying to be positive and by not being forthright. And then it gets so in a state of disrepair and beyond recovery that desperate measures have to be taken. And so, yeah, there's a real anger when people feel like, hey, why didn't I know it was as bad as it was? Mm-hmm. And then that often leads to a fourth stage of depression, of grief, and that's depression, where I'm sad, I'm losing the parish I love. It feels like a death has occurred. Mm-hmm. And that is what grief is. It's a loss of something. Mm-hmm. And that brings depression stage. But then lastly, a final stage is acceptance, where I will embrace the new reality, follow the leadership's decision, and trust God for the outcome. Mm-hmm. I can see the benefits of merging. I'm excited about this next chapter of my parish. And so even though people may know this is hard and there's a loss, and they realize this is the right thing to do, it doesn't make it easier in terms of their emotions, but they do come to acceptance. And everyone who goes through a merger, everyone in that parish is going to go through these 5 stages. Some will go in and out of them. Some will go through them faster than others. But it's important that parish leaders and diocese leadership recognize that there is a grieving process that the parishioners are going to experience, and to be sensitive to that.
One thing we talk about in our Parish Catalyst learning communities is the change curve, and grief and change are all very similar. The change curve looks like this. There's the status quo. Hey, everything's fine with my parish. There's a disruption, which we all experienced this change curve during COVID, right? Things are not able to go the way that I'd wanted them to. We explore new possibilities, we experiment with new ideas, and then we integrate those new ideas. But you'll see that grief is very similar. Denial is when the status quo can no longer be the status quo, and we get angry about it, and then we get depressed, or we begin to accept that we're going to lose something that we don't want to lose. We try to negotiate it. We try to experiment with it. And there is a 6th stage that a psychologist has recently suggested that I think is actually very helpful, and that is purpose. That after acceptance, we really need to find greater purpose in it, not just tolerate it, but really find God's purpose in it. And I love that you're talking about that. So as we go through this process, you mentioned some potholes that we want to avoid, things that we don't want to do. Let's look at that now.
Well, John, there are many advantages to merging, as we've talked about, but there are also some potholes to avoid in the merger journey. I think the very first one is waiting too long to consider merging. Some parishes wait so long that they become unsalvageable and they're beyond recovery. And then we just have to shut the whole thing down. And when maybe a merger earlier could have revitalized that location, that congregation, and brought new life and health to it. So there's a danger in congregations waiting to be on a point of return. A second mistake is to not correctly define the relationship. We talked about earlier, every congregation, every parish is either struggling, that in decline, they're stuck, not going anywhere, but stuck, or they're strong, they're growing. And so as you begin to have the conversation between 2 parishes or between several parishes or congregations, it's very important to define who's struggling, who's stuck, who's strong. And as we mentioned before, the best merger outcomes are like a dance where one leads and the other follows. And so it's very important to determine who's in the lead, who's in the follow, who's joining, who's leading, to correctly define that relationship at the beginning. Another pothole to avoid is under communicating, as we talked about earlier. It's to, once you decide that we're going to join together, it's so important to over communicate to both parishes or all the parishes. Why are we doing this? What brought this about? Who will be our priest? Who will be our leadership? What will this look like on the other side of merging? And to be consistent across all parishes about that we're saying the same thing together in unity. So over communicating is very important to do. Another pothole to avoid is to refusal to release control. The biggest impediment to a merger is someone or some few who don't want to give up control. Somebody doesn't want to give up control, doesn't want to give up their preferences, their traditions, their way of doing things, and they stand in the way, and resist, and they're in position of influence where they can prevent it from happening. So that's a pothole to avoid. Another one is looking backward instead of forward. The danger is to try to preserve a failed way of doing congregational parish life of the past, trying to hold on to the past that doesn't work anymore, instead of embracing a new chapter, a new beginning. And so looking forward instead of backward is the right thing to do. Lastly, another is to a lack of clarity on the non-negotiables. The more clarity that parishes have on what will and will not change, the better the outcome will be. Mm-hmm. It's very clear it's very important to get clarity before the decision is made. And then lastly, underestimating the pain of transition, which we've already talked about, that grieving process is so important to helping land in a good outcome, is helping our people through and being sensitive to their grieving that they're going through.
Well, let's go back to the positive. We've looked at some of the potholes and the negative things. Success is possible, but I think a lot of it is how you define it, right? If you're seeking for ways to succeed that are impossible, then you will not succeed. So let's look at what success looks like and maybe also what it does not look like.
Well, first of all, parish merger success is not retaining 100% of your staff, volunteer, and parishioners. That's an expectation. It's not realistic. Mm-hmm. Secondly, success is not 100% approval of the parishioners. Now, I know that the different congregations, different parishes, different churches have different ways of approving this, but voting or approving a merger. But it's important to recognize that not everyone is going to be 100% in approving either formally or informally of a merger. Third, success that is not saving a facility for emotional or nostalgic reasons. We're not in the building saving business, we're in the soul saving business. Parish merger success is not preserving a parish name. Mm-hmm. You know, the church has been around for nearly 2,000 years. Mm-hmm. And there's been a lot of those kind of changes down through the centuries, but the church is still alive and strong and vibrant today. There's those buildings come and go, names come and go, but so success isn't trying to preserve those things. And then lastly, maintaining the status quo. You know, as someone has said, status quo is Latin for the word, the mess we're in. There's no joy, there's no success in just maintaining the status quo. We can do better than that. But here's some things that a better way to think about parish merger success is retaining people who embrace a shared vision. Anytime new congregations join together, you're going to lose a few people. But what's important is that the people who do stay with you share the vision for the future. Even when you get a new priest, a new leadership, there's going to be people who will prefer to move on to some other congregation or parish. But so what's important and what success looks like is those who stay, and the majority will stay in a merger. That's been overwhelmingly in all of our surveys. The majority of people stay in a merged congregation, and it's important that they embrace the vision for the future together. Another definition of success, of parish success, is merger success is 100% engagement of those who do approve, and they approve by staying and being a part of the new entity, and they involve themselves 100% in helping the new merged congregation to succeed. Merger success is also stewarding a facility for kingdom purposes. Here's a great facility. Here's a building, a facility that we can continue to use in a different way, an effective way, but for kingdom purposes. Merger success is leveraging a legacy. There's some parishes that are a century or two old, and they have an incredible heritage that a merger can leverage that legacy of the past by joining with a vibrant parish that can continue on that legacy. The biggest loss would be to see a historic congregation, parish, dissolve and go out of business and be gone and no longer exist. Instead, by merging with a vibrant congregation, a parish, it can leverage that heritage and continue on that legacy. And then lastly, I think most importantly is that merger success is beginning a new life cycle where congregation may be in decline, maybe on the verge of becoming extinct, or just stuck and just slowly dying a slow death. It can have a new beginning, a new life cycle, a rebirth, and we're in the rebirthing business, aren't we? Yeah. And so this is a beautiful outcome of a successful parish merger.
Well, you've talked about there's essentially, usually a strong parish and a weaker parish, a struggling parish and a growing parish. And there are different important steps for each of those parishes and parish leaders and parishioners. Let's look at those.
Yeah. Well, if you're the adopting parish or the lead parish, you would say, first of all, it's as the leadership of that parish or overseeing that parish, to be inclusive. That is to be welcoming of the other parish coming into your parish or coming together, to be inclusive, you're not just guests, we're family. We're part of the family. And we welcome you, and we'll be better because you're part of us and with us. And so being inclusive is one next step. Have a mindset of inclusivity. And secondly, to be kingdom-minded, as we talked about, to be thinking about what is the kingdom of Jesus desire and want here. What does he want? This is his church and not my church, or this is his congregation, his parish. And so what would be the best kingdom win here by us joining together to look for that? And then lastly, to show compassion, as we talked about, being a merger-friendly leader, that you care about the other parish and the people in the parish, and you care about the pain that they're going to go through by potentially joining with you and the things they may give up and the sense of loss, being compassionate. Now, if you're the joining parish, I think it's very important that, first of all, is to define reality. That is, again, actually, both parishes leaders can be doing this. Am I a struggling parish in decline? Is our parish stuck? Or are we strong? Are we growing? And so what is our reality? Reality is our friend. And that's the first step that leadership does, is to define reality. Where are we now and where do we want to be?
That would also be that reality of what is the new parish going to look like, or what is our role in that going to be, and how are we going to fit in? You said a lot about defining those things, and negotiating them ahead of time is really important, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then I think, again, like the adopting parish leadership, to be kingdom-minded. Again, I'm willing, as the Apostle Paul said, to set aside my own self-interest for the interest of the things of God, for the kingdom of Jesus. What is best from that point of view, not just from my point of view, to be kingdom-minded. And then to look forward, not backwards. Mm-hmm. This isn't about trying to preserve a failed way of doing parish life of the past, but it's really, how could we be a vibrant parish in this community that is maybe changing around us or whatever, and really be the face and the hands and feet of Jesus to the community that we live in.
One of my favorite quotes is from Gustav Mahler, where he says, "Tradition is meant to pass on a fire, not to preserve the ashes." Mm-hmm. And I think it's important, looking forward, to that we are passing on a fire here. We're preserving a fire. We're not just trying to preserve the past. Well, I asked you,
we can celebrate the past, but we embrace the future. Yep,
absolutely. I asked you for a scripture in closing that you felt like summed up all of this, and I'm sure this is in your book, but let's look at this one now and tell me why this was important to you.
Well, I would just say that Ecclesiastes 4:9 says it well, kind of the basis of the whole concept of merging, and the basis of our book. Two, the writer says, are better than one because they have a good return for their labor. Mm-hmm. And so that captures it right there. Could we be better together? Yes.
Jim, thank you so much for taking the time today. Thank you for all the work that you've done in this area and for sharing it with us. And we'll be sure to direct folks your way for any help in that. But appreciate you and all that you're doing for the church.
John, thank you for the invitation to join you. Be blessed, be fruitful, go multiply.
Great stuff there from Jim, and great wisdom and experience. And again, as I said, he'll be joining us at the end of this webinar for some Q&A. We've got one question that's come in already. Feel free to send in more, some great things to discuss. Before we get into Jeff Corrigan, I want to just remind you of a couple of things. One, if you've watched any of these, you know that I'm going to encourage you, especially if you're a merging parish, a parish going through transition, a parish trying to re-engage your parishioners. I know a lot of parishes right now, people are coming back slowly, but how can we really kickstart things and get them going again? I encourage you to consider our virtual learning community. The next one starts June 6th and 7th. You'll be in a cohort with 5 or 6 other parishes around the country. You'll be learning together. You'll be focusing on making disciples. You'll be growing as a staff, encouraged as a staff, inspired as a staff. And then you'll be creating a plan for the next 6 months. And then 6 months later, we'll come back together again and revisit that plan as a group and begin to work towards the next 6 months. We'll do that for 18 months together as a cohort. So if you need something to help you get unstuck, I hope that you'll consider that. Or if you want to move from good to great. Now, our next conversation with Jeff is with Jeff Corrigan. We're going to have this conversation. We're going to do a little Q&A, and then that'll probably be the end of our hour together. But I have a final interview with Father Neil Mononach, and you can watch that. That'll be like a bonus conversation at the end. I understand if you need to leave at the end of our time. But I want to tell you before I introduce Jeff in this conversation, he is a writer and a social ministry consultant, but he is the author of a resource called New Wine, New Wineskins. Now, full disclosure, this is a Renew product, but I would be recommending this whether we were a part of Renew or not. This is, it's a faith-sharing resource for restructuring parishes. So the idea is that after you announce that this is going to happen and people are starting to process it, that you invite people to be in small groups where they can process this transition together. In this resource, I'll just go over some of the sections with you. Jesus Christ in our heart and our lives, the church as the people of God, change in our lives and in our world, the Paschal mystery from death to life, discerning the movement of the Holy Spirit, pursuing the common good, unity in Christ, what does that mean? Honoring diversity, stewarding God's gifts. Each of these are weeks or sections of this faith sharing resource that I just think are great topics for people to read through together, discuss together. And as I talked with Jeff about it, what better way to help bring a unity among your people and give them a place to talk and work these things out, where they really feel shepherded through this experience and not just kind of forced into it. So let's look at this conversation now with Jeff. And then we'll wrap things up with Q&A. Hey, Jeff, thank you for joining me today. And, you know, as I've looked through this resource that you've created, I see where it could be so helpful for parishioners processing all of this. What really inspired you to create this small group study?
Really just the need of the people of God. I was working with Bishop Budkowski in the Diocese of Metuchen, which is in central New Jersey, on ways we could create church structures that worked for the new century. It was about 2008 at the time. And there were a number of parishes that were just not doing so well, you know, whether it was because the ethnic group they served had mostly moved away, or whether there were financial difficulties due to people becoming more secularized, or new ethnic groups moving into areas that were predominantly Hindu. So it really was a situation where some changes to church structures needed to be made. But my experience was that was the easy part. It was easy to envision a new way, maybe two different communities or three different communities could continue on, but under new structure. Maybe a merged church, or maybe one of them's closed and another one comes in. We even had a quasi parish, a Korean quasi parish that had no building, just a community. Where did they fit into this? Those kinds of questions. I really did find that was the easiest question to answer. We had a group of people who would pray and think about it for a year and then make recommendations for the bishop. But then what happens next? That was the question that I couldn't really answer well for myself. So Renew International is located in our state. So started a conversation with Sister Terry, who at the time was the president. And we thought a small Christian community experience for recently merged or twinned or linked parishes, people who used to not collaborate in the mission of Jesus Christ, who now found themselves part of the same parish structure. There's going to be a lot of grief involved at the beginning of that. Because often, the truth of how unsustainable the church structure formerly was kept from people by previous pastors, and so there was kind of needed to be an honest reckoning with what happened, and then the choices that the bishop made around going forward, and then figuring out a way to both work through their grief, but also get back to mission. Because as long as people are focused on what was happening in the past, they're never going to be able to move forward. And so everyone dealing with the feelings around all of that, but also asking themselves, what does this mean to our community now? What does this mean to be a community of disciples of Jesus Christ today, in this place and in this time?
I've noticed here in your content, you start with the foundation, Jesus Christ, and the church, and the universal church, the bigger picture of everything that God is doing and the purpose of the church. How important is it in this process of merging to step back and help people get that bigger picture beyond just their little place in the world, in their parish?
Right, and there's two parts to that. One is in recognizing that the way they experienced God in their previous community was a sacramental experience, and it's okay that they feel some degree of loss and sadness, even anger over that. It's okay. But then there's a second question, which is, how am I to go on as a disciple? Is it entirely limited to that experience where maybe my children were baptized or I was baptized? Or, is our experience of church just a small C church experience where it has to be in that community? I mean, that building only? It's okay that they have those feelings, and it's important that we get them out in the experience. But it's also important for folks then to say, how does my discipleship look now? How will I respond to the call of Jesus? How will I respond to that baptismal call to be priest, prophet, and king? What does that mean to be priest, prophet, and king in this new structure? And how can I learn from others who are going through exactly the same thing, even if I didn't know them before? So the reason we focus on church with a capital C, the universal church, is to help people look beyond just that experience that they're holding on to, and to recognize that it's healthy that they have strong feelings about that. But it might be unhealthy for them to continue to hold on to that in the future as they enter into this new structure.
I love that. I mean, at Parish Catalyst, we're all about helping parishes make disciples. And it sounds like this is a discipleship opportunity to help people understand that the Paschal mystery is something that happens in our lives in different ways, that this is an example of that, that if we truly are like Jesus in this world, the Son of Man had nowhere to lay his head, so he wasn't attached to a house. Tell us more about that, how you've seen this small group experience actually have a positive effect on people's lives through this transition, rather than just trying to manage change. It can actually be an opportunity for significant growth in people's lives.
Right, and the timing of that is so important, that we don't recommend that, the day after a merger is announced, a small group process starts. There needs to be time to work with people's grieving. And I found particularly, this is maybe more of a Northeastern phenomenon of the ethnic parishes, personal parishes that are dedicated to a ministry to a particular ethnic group. Folks who are part of that, the mission of that particular parish was for their ethnic group. And for them to then say, wow, now we're merging with a territorial parish, and they're mentioning that this ministry will continue, but it's no longer a Polish church. It's no longer a Slovakian church, and so forth. So there is a great deal of grieving that happens in those situations. And that needs to be attended to for a time. And here's where the pastoral challenge is figuring out when the best time to have a small group experience like this is. Is it when people are fighting mad and angry that the parish that their grandparents built is now no longer exists? I would say it's really a challenge for a pastor and his staff and his parish pastoral council to really determine the right time for that, because it should not be immediately after the merger is announced. But then again, people can't, it's not helpful to people to help them stay in their grief forever either.
You talked some about ethnic parishes being some of the biggest challenges in this merger environment. But I've also heard you mention that they tend to have a lifespan of 100 years. Why is that? And how can you help those parishes through their unique grief?
Yeah, what we found is it may have something to do with the number of generations, like it's about 2 generations before the grandchildren go off into the world. But I think this idea of a parish for each ethnic group, often European group, that was maybe a good choice for that time, but there was less mobility in society. I mean, if you look at 100 years ago, I mean, I think sort of the turn of the 20th century to the turn of the 21st century, if you look at how mobile people's lives are compared to what they were before, I mean, they weren't, at the turn of the 20th century, they weren't that far from covered wagon days, when folks would go out west and they would never see their parents again. We're in a whole different world now. And that mobility has made the church need to become more nimble in how it responds to people. So the territorial parishes have been very nimble. I mean, you'll hear people say, oh, it was a German parish, then it was an Irish parish, and now it's Hispanic. But actually, it's a territorial parish. But these different ethnic groups live there. And because of that structure, the church, the big church, the diocese could be more responsive and more nimble. But when you say this church is for people from Slovakia, and that's the way it's going to be forever, the migration of those folks, even within the United States, the folks, in a lot of our eastern cities, there was a kind of a white flight that happened, that folks moved out to the suburbs and their parish was still in the center city. And so they commuted to that. Well, that lasted about a generation. And the children of those folks, they go off. And then there's also a sense of assimilation. Many of the immigrant groups that personal parishes were established for have either assimilated or moved away, or a combination of the two. And when I was working with those parishes, I kept seeing these founding dates that were about 100 years earlier. We find today the bishops have really moved off. There's no official policy of the conference or anything, but bishops generally are not making personal parishes for ethnic groups much at all these days because of that.
I think, yeah, I think you touched on something there that we don't often think about in these situations, is the complexities of it's not just one group of people that we're helping shepherd through this transition. There's ethnicities, but there's also different life stages and ages. But even within those ethnicities, there's generations that see this completely differently, right? I was just at the Religious Education Congress in LA, and we were talking about the need for different curriculums for Spanish speakers, but also for those who are now speak English, but they're culturally Spanish. So it's the same curriculum that's enculturalized into their culture, but it's in English. And so I just would imagine in these merging of parishes, you have so many different demographics and different people groups that are approaching this from different angles. Do you find that when you bring those people together into small groups like this, it helps them maybe understand each other and have a chance to express the challenges that they're facing?
Yeah, that would be a group process, though. I mean, it doesn't happen immediately, but that's absolutely true. There's multiple communities within parishes. Like if you just merge a Hispanic Latino parish with a territorial parish that's predominantly Hispanic Latino, if you merge those parishes with any say white Anglo group or an African American parish, or many of the other different ethnic parishes that are out there, if you do that, you're going to have communities within communities come together. And we find this, you mentioned Hispanic Latino. Yeah, it was almost a joke, but it actually happened to our Hispanic ministry director, who he was playing basketball with some young adults in Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and they got to know him pretty well. They said, "Hey, Father, you think we could have the Spanish Mass in English?" And that is exactly what you're pointing to. They're not asking to go to, down the street to the Anglo parish or even the Polish parish that now has the masses all in English. They're not asking for that. They're bored to death by that. They want something lively. They want something with music that they're accustomed to. They want, really charismatic preachers that preach the way that they're used to. That's why they're asking for the Spanish Mass in English, but they want it all in English. So you're exactly right. And we do have diversities upon diversities. And small group experiences can be a way for people to begin to let their guard down and meet each other and begin to see a possibility of working together in missionary discipleship together.
Yeah, I can see where this kind of small group experience, if there were listening facilitators in every group, that it could really kind of be a synodal process, especially in light of everything that we're doing with that right now, that you could use these small groups in the midst of a merger to help listen to the needs, concerns, pains, griefs of the people, and help minister to those better.
Absolutely. And so that's where you would need people who have some degree of training as facilitators, but also there's so many people who are just coming off the encuentro process. We have lots of processes in the church. We have diocesan synods, we have encuentro, and now we have the synod on synodality. And so it's a way for us to integrate synodality into everything we're doing, which I think is what Pope Francis is trying to do, among other things. And for this kind of process, we can draw people who had experiences in the synod and synodality, people who have participated in encuentro.
I'm going to give you, we're going to close with a tough one here. Are you ready? Ready for this?
Sure.
Let's talk about new councils and ministries and leadership structures. What from your experience is the best way to address that reorganization process? And is there a way, or are there several different ways we should be looking at?
Well, that's one where the pastor definitely needs to know the smell of the sheep, that to understand what are the diversities here and what are the structures where it's best for us to all work together, and what are the structures that need to stay separate. I mean, we've heard many stories about youth group. Okay, we have a parish that has a youth group in Spanish merging with a parish with a youth group in English. And also the people from the English speaking youth group are not Hispanic Latino. So what's the best thing to do there? Okay, some people will say, well, they all should speak whatever common language, they speak English in school, so they should speak English in youth group. Well, okay, but is something lost by that? Is something lost by that? The same thing with different altar and rosary societies. We had altar and rosary societies in 3 different languages. Well, their solution was to have some meetings with the original groups and some meetings all together. They all did speak English, but they also got something by preaching in the mother tongue, when the language they use to pray. And so they want to have some experience of praying together. So I hate to give you an answer that is in some ways a non-answer, because it needs pastoral judgment, or what are the things that we need to do all together, and what are the things we need to do separately. Certainly, an overall parish pastoral council, there needs to be some commonalities to that. But maybe that parish pastoral council has some sub-organizations or committees that function as pastoral councils for those groups. For example, we had a German parish in New Brunswick, New Jersey, that became a sort of a pan-Latino parish, but still functioned as a German parish. There was only 7 or 8 people left, but perhaps there could continue to be some kind of pastoral council committee that brought those folks together, so that, the group that built the church is not lost in all the new arrivals. At the same time, we had parishes that functioned kind of on the basis of apartheid, where you'd have, let's say, a Polish parish that was now 90% Hispanic, but the Polish folks still controlled all the decisions that were made. I mean, that's literally how apartheid works. So there, again, there needs to be some discernment about what do we need to do together and what do we need to continue to do separately, because that is a way of ministering to people in the culture and language they're accustomed to.
Yeah, what I think I hear you saying is that it is going to be more complex. We do need to use a lot of discernment in figuring it out, but it's important to give people places within those councils where they feel like they have a voice and they're heard for their constituency. And I think you're right. I think that's so important. In wrapping up here, I just want to leave you with opportunity to share if there's one thing that people that are going through this process, let's say on a parish level, if you had one piece of advice for them, or one thing that you've seen to be important through all these mergers that you've looked at, what would that be?
To make some new friends. That the biggest challenge is when folks in their community that's merging into the new community do a kind of othering, like what those people, what the Koreans think, what the Anglos think, what, the old people think, it without building relationships, without listening to each other, whether you do a small Christian community process like this, or you just try to do it on your own, of just getting to know some new people from the other communities and really hear what's on their hearts. That is just essential, because as long as we're talking about those people, we're never going to be neither Jew nor Greek in Christ Jesus.
I love that. Make new friends. That's so great. And I do think language is powerful in that. When you hear people using terms like they or those people, as opposed to we and us, you can see it communicates the difference in the mindset. So I love that. Make new friends. Thank you, Jeff, so much for your time today. Appreciate your just your expertise, your input here. We're grateful for the work that you do.
Thanks, John. Much appreciated. Take care.
All right, good things there from Jeff. And I hope you will check out the small group curriculum. It'll be in the email coming out to you after this. I know we're at the end of our time. I want to just bring Jim back on. We have one question that I'd like to hear him answer live. And it's about this idea of a larger parish absorbing a smaller parish. There was a part of our conversation I had to cut out about the different types of mergers and how they work. But let me read the question, and then I'll kind of set up what I'd like to hear from you, Jim. The question is, one of the problems I've found with the merger of a large parish with a smaller one has been the smaller parish experienced it as an absorption, not a marriage. The inequality of size, resources, etc., naturally create a dominant partner. How would you suggest diocesan leadership should equalize the two potential partners? Now, I'll let you correct this if you want, Jim, but let me just say, total equality can't be the goal, right? Especially when we're talking about a much larger parish and a smaller parish. If that's our goal for success, it's not going to happen. But how could this happen in a way that the smaller parish doesn't feel like there's such a power dynamic that they've lost any sense of voice or identity in that?
That's a great question. And I would say that the description there that the person who wrote the question is accurate. There are mergers that do feel that are more like a full absorption, that the joining parish is fully absorbed into the lead parish or the adopting parish, and they bring very little of their way of doing parish life that they're used to and all that, because that's one of the reasons why they're in decline. And so that is one kind of merger, but it's not all kinds of mergers. I think probably the most predominant merger that I work with is what we call the adoption merger, where the joining parish does bring some ways of doing things, some freshness, some staff, perhaps some programs or ministries that are embraced and integrated into the adopting parish. Then there are marriage mergers, where it's 2 or 3 parishes that bring their best to the union and they create something new together. And so that probably is another expression of where there's more equality. But in every merger, there's going to be a dominant or lead culture and lead parish, and that culture is the one that is the dominant culture that the merged parishes will become united around that. I think but in the joining church, we call those the first description a rebirth merger, where that parish really is being reborn, and they're valuable as what they bring to the table, but what they bring is from the old way of doing things isn't that useful, helpful in the new entity.
Yeah, and wouldn't you say that some things you could do would be like include a couple of people from the smaller parish on the parish council, include some people in some of these seats at the table. Obviously, they're not going to have the majority or even half the seats, but they're going to have a seat at the table, right?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's part of being inclusive. All mergers should be welcoming, inclusive, and have a way for the joining parishioners to be involved and be engaged and welcomed and have a place. And yes, I mean, that gets back to what's it like? What does it mean to be a merger-friendly leader, church congregational leader? And that's clearly our goal. We want to become one family.
Well, Jim, I wish we had more time. I appreciate you staying with us to jump back in. We're after the 1 hour segment here. But thank you so much for your input, and I'll be sure to give people your contact if they want to reach out to you later.
Thank you, John.
And for those of you that are still with us, hey, as I said, our hour is up, but I do have about a 12-minute interview with Father Neil Monarnock, who has pastored a merger for the last 10 years. It started close to 10 years ago. And he talks from that 10 years of experience of pastoring through a merger. And so if you want to hang around and watch that, I'll make sure you get bonus credit for staying after class. But I'm going to play that now, and then we'll wrap things up in about 12 minutes. Father Neil, thank you for joining me. And I just wanted to hear from a pastor's perspective, if you were going to give some advice to a pastor leading through a merger, what would be your advice from your experience?
Hi, John. Happy to be here. And I have had that experience. And, most of us don't go looking for that opportunity, to do mergers and the like. And there's certainly a good bit of things to wade through and difficulties, with that. But I guess one, as everybody knows, it's going to take time and it's going to take some patience. It hadn't been anything that I'd done before, so it was kind of a new experience. It happened more quickly than I thought it would. I was only here 6 months, and there was a lot of discontent in the two parishes with trying to maintain, two different staffs and two different locations, and communication was really hard. So in one way, as far as the staff was concerned, after we did something for 6 months, they were like ready to do that. And I don't know that the parish was in the same way ready, but at least there had been pastoral discussion and planning that took place. And that was a big help to us. So 6 months after I arrived, we started the merger process. I was very surprised. I thought that was going to be at least a year or a year and a half with it.
Yeah, what would you say was the most helpful in making that a smooth transition?
Well, sometimes things just happen at the right time. We had a deanery meeting. There was a couple that was here sent by the Archdiocese to talk about a second marriage program. And they were talking about different elements of that. And as they were doing that, all of a sudden, things started going, lights started flashing in my brain. And because they were talking about the challenges of a second marriage, particularly when there's children. And it was something that they were addressing in this program. And they were talking about the fact that, how hard it is to bring two families together. It's hard before, and it's hard during. They said that sometimes people think that, well, when we finally get married and we're living together, both families under one roof, maybe that will make things easier. And they admitted maybe not with that, but they gave two principles, and this is what was most helpful to me. They said, in effect, when you're merging two families, in my mind, merging two parishes, they listed two really important ingredients. They said everybody has to be reminded first to listen with respect. And secondly, what followed along with that was whenever we're speaking to one another, we have to speak with respect. And I really took that to heart. They said that if families can just manage that, in 5 years, they're going to feel like a family. In 10 years, they'll probably feel like they were that way all the time. They also said that in the case of those that children that have left the family, they're going to be really, really hard to bring in. And we had that experience here too. We had people that kind of left parish. They had the opportunity of a mass at the Catholic hospital here in town, and they just kind of went away. Those were the hardest. But those two things of listening with respect and speaking with respect was just something that was called to mind at each and every meeting, and it wasn't always easy, but I just think that that was a huge help in the whole process of that. We're 10 years down the road. We feel like we're a family. It's the only reason why we've been able to take up a sticky issue at present, with the fact that we have two churches, and we're asking the question, is it in the best long-term interest of Epiphany Parish to maintain two churches? And we've had a pretty good go with the merger of parishes, and we're doing fine with this one now too because of that.
It's interesting you bring that up with the marriage class, the blended families, because as I talk to more people about this and research it, that metaphor of marriage continues to come up. I haven't heard anyone yet use that metaphor of second marriage, of blended families, which is even a better picture of it. Would you have any other advice for leading, as far as leading and merging staffs and leading two different community staffs? What has been really helpful to you in that?
I know that everybody doesn't get this opportunity because sometimes places are far enough apart that they can't be in the same place, in the same office, parish environment always at the same time. But that was a great advantage when they were able to work together. I would, one of the things we weren't able to do, we were just kind of fumbling getting started. It was even hard to have something where we had a joint meeting of staff. So the communication that happens when those people are together, I think, is just a really, really important one, in terms of that. And admittedly, we had to be really conscious. Another piece, we had to be really conscious of people feeling like we were choosing one place or another place. And sometimes for a period of time, we tried to do kind of some at this, and then the next year something at that, and the like. But we came to a better, happier spot when we were finally able to say, whether it's our parish festival or whatever it is, whichever is the best location is where that belongs. And not be trying to do halfsies, with one place or the other. That was, it was something that was going to be self-defeating, and we used it a bit at first. We're very, very mindful that even to the present time, that we don't just primarily do things at one, but the space and the opportunity to do what's best is what we choose.
That's great. How long would you say it took to get to that place of people feeling less territorial and feeling more okay with, hey, let's find the best place for that gathering?
Well, there really was something, I think, at the 5-year mark. I mean, and then it's not completely gone. I was thinking that we were like 90%, 95% there. And then COVID came along. And you see, that forced us into lots of decisions like, oh, we have a system to live stream at one parish, but not the other. I mean, with that, and it would have been something where you would have liked to do something at both, but the live stream was a great advantage to many of our people who weren't able to come and be present at Mass. So we continued to do things at both, but it didn't all end up at one. COVID was one, that brought out a little bit more of the, hey, seems like everything is at one place and not as much at the other. And interestingly, there was a lot of competition between these two parishes once upon a time. They had their own schools. They played basketball against one another. They had pastors that, were competitive and challenging, like, oh, over at that parish, they made X amount of money at their festival. We're better than they are, blah, 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 type of a thing. So it's there. One of the things, though, that has been, as we've been doing this second piece about whether we can address one church as being in our best interest or not, is we did some survey work with that. The Archdiocese helped us with that. Um, as you would guess, so many of our new families and younger families, they don't understand what the fuss is about. And in all honesty, lots of our folks, they go to whatever time is convenient with them for mass. That's kind of determinative of where they go. And there's still a few people that, and it would be and will be a hard thing if we're making a decision to close one, but we'll take our time with that, just like we took time with the merger.
Well, as one of our panelists said, if your goal for success is 100% agreement and 100% enthusiasm, you will never succeed. There will always be some, right? But if you can get those who get a vision for it, what you're trying to accomplish on board, then that is success. Just in closing, one thing that we've talked about throughout this is that it's not just pain, and it's not just grief, and it's not just loss. There are benefits of merging two parishes and the synergy that occurs there. Could you share with us some of the benefits that you've seen from this experience?
Yeah, we are doing much better in our programming as a merged parish than we were trying to do things individually. I just know that we're better able to respond to things. We have more resources towards that with things. Certainly a benefit for us with that. I would guess, another benefit, really has been a greater sense of unity as the Catholic Church in Mason City. We're in an area here where numbers wise, there are percentage wise, there's a good number of Catholics in town, but we're in an area where things are primarily Lutheran with things. And, I think we have a better sense of being a Catholic community in the midst of what we do. And, we've done some good outreach things. We've taken from both parishes, would probably be a third benefit, what has worked there, and we've chosen to continue those things. And now we have greater participation. For instance, we've had a baby pantry here for years and years. And it's kind of a simple concept, but there's not anything like this in our area. And we have people that come through here every day because of the baby pantry, and they're not Catholic, and it is an outreach to the community. If the baby pantry is something to work towards with that, and we had $5,000, that they gave towards the baby pantry. Those things wouldn't have happened, with a separate parish. That's a one parish thing that's uniting us with our school too.
That's great. That's good to hear. And those are actually some of the things that our panelist was talking about, that do create a better synergy, a better, more resources, better processes as you take the best from both. So thank you for sharing those things. I know you've been an encouragement to some watching us today. Thank you, Father Neil. We are cheering for you and appreciate all the great work you're doing there.
Yep. Thanks much, Jen. Bye.